From downtown Salt Lake City, the Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the 3rd Congressional District Republican Primary Candidates Debate.
Hello, and welcome to the debate between Republican primary candidates running for their party's nomination for U.S. 3rd Congressional District. My name is Natalie Gochnour. I'm the director of the Kem C. Gardiner Policy Center at the University of Utah. I've been invited to moderate this debate organized by the Utah Debate Commission. This event, held on June 1st, is part of the Utah Debate Commission's work to educate Utah voters and encourage the civil exchange of ideas. The candidates running for the nomination are John Curtis and Chris Herod. The winner of this primary will then compete in the November general election representing the Republican Party. Those that have registered to vote in the Republican primary should start receiving their ballots in the next week. If you are an unaffiliated voter, you can still register to vote in the Republican primary until Election Day. As you can see, John Curtis is not on stage today. He is traveling as part of his congressional commitments. Both candidates and the Utah Debate Commission worked to try to find another option in order to hold the debate, but unfortunately, a resolution could not be reached. The Utah Debate Commission's rules state that if this situation would occur, we would hold the debate on our originally declared date, which is today, and that a single candidate, in this case Mr. Herod, will be alone on stage. Mr. Herod, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Since only one candidate is present, our format will be different from a normal debate. Mr. Herod will have 1 minute for both an opening and closing statement. Otherwise, the format will be more like a candidate conversation, shifting from topic to topic. You can contribute to this live broadcast by using the hashtag UTDebates on social media. Let's get started. Mr. Herod, your opening statement, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here today, and I thank the Debate Commission for holding this event. This election is important. I've been in the 3rd District my entire life, and I believe that the 3rd District deserves to have a conservative representative that represents the value of the 3rd District. I'm a consistent conservative. I have a proven conservative record in the Utah House. In fact, I'm the only one that's been a Republican in this race for my entire life. I do hope today that we get to contrast some of our different opinions. I do have differing opinions with the incumbent on his vote for the ERA amendment, for the January 6th Commission, as well as the co-sponsorship of the censorship of President Trump, as well as the support of the Mueller investigation. But I truly believe that this nation is at a crossroads. Never in my life have I seen so many outside threats, and unfortunately so many inside threats. And I look forward to an open and honest conversation today. Thank you, Nat.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Herod. So we're going to start with foreign policy, and we're going to go right to Ukraine. You have a lot of experience. You've lived in Ukraine. Your wife is Ukrainian. How would you assess the current situation, and are you supportive of U.S. involvement to date?
I'm supportive of the involvement of giving weapons to help the Ukrainians defend themselves, but I'm not supportive of boots on the ground or having more engagement. We have to be very careful. I have taught at 2 different universities in Ukraine, as well as lived in Moscow for a year, and so we have to be very careful of Russian pride. And I'm greatly disappointed in the way that the Biden administration has handled this situation. I understand who Putin is. Putin is an amoral chess player. When he sees advantage, he takes advantage of it. And unfortunately, there was the terrible withdrawal of Afghanistan, where we left $80 billion there. If the Ukrainians had that $80 billion, I don't think it would be a close fight. But the problem is we're not willing to be energy independent. And so President Putin doesn't think we're serious. President Biden can say whatever he wants, and I actually think some of his comments are completely irresponsible. They're not disciplined. You don't talk about regime change with a nuclear power. You don't talk about that we want to permanently weaken Russia. That plays into the Russian psyche, and it's actually fodder for Putin to have support. But I do think that the world owes the Ukrainian people a tremendous thanks. because I personally believe that while Putin and Russia is a threat, China is 10 times the threat. And if the war would have taken just 3 days like Putin originally thought it would be, I think there's a good chance that Xi would have already attacked Taiwan. And that would be a major threat, both economically and militarily to us because of what Taiwan produces.
Do you give President Biden any credit for what he's done to help pull together the international community and for the NATO response?
I think I give a little bit, but not much. You know, for me, frankly, my wife and I didn't think that Putin would actually attack all of Ukraine. We thought he would just try to get the Donbass region. But if he really knew that that was Russians' intention, the best deterrent would have been to give those weapons beforehand, to make it more costly for Russia to do that. We should have been giving Stingers and those things before. But the best war is always no war. And so I'm a big believer in deterrence. And I do worry a little bit about making sure that we continue with deterrence against Russia and China as well.
Where do you stand, Mr. Herod, on NATO? You know, our former president had a lot of critical things to say about NATO. NATO has been fortified. It's doing more than it's done in many, many years. Do you support the U.S.'s involvement in NATO?
I do support NATO, but I also defend the previous to president because I think that was a negotiating strategy. The fact of the matter is NATO wasn't paying its fair share, and the United States for years has kind of funded European socialism. And so there were many NATO countries that weren't contributing their 2% that they're supposed to. And President Trump was able to get them, and it's actually very good that he did, because just imagine the situation that we would have been in right now if it was back to the old numbers. But Europe is much better off now than it was before the Trump administration.
I've heard you say in previous public settings that if President Trump were president, this would have never happened. Am I quoting you correctly?
Yes.
Could you elaborate?
You know, for me, I've said that this race is personal, and it's unfortunate because, you know, I never thought in my life a place where I taught, you know, where I used to exit the subway, the building right next to it has been blown up. The place where my wife, where I proposed to my wife, the Opera House, has been hit, which was a quarter mile from my in-laws. But I truly believe that had President Trump still been president, he understood Putin. And Putin is basically a street thug. And give the man a little bit of credibility, a little bit of respect if it saves, you know, 100,000 Ukrainians. It's kind of the same thing that he did with Kim Jong-un. But unfortunately for me, the difficulty, and I've had to forgive people, because, you know, there were many people in our own party that did not support the previous president, didn't vote for the Republican candidate. And I don't, you know, when even Bill Maher, liberal Bill Maher of HBO, says that, you know, this would not have happened, President Trump, then if he was still president, I think there's a pretty good consensus that it wouldn't have happened.
So I wanted to talk more about foreign policy, but that was really interesting to learn about your Ukrainian experience. Let's come closer to this shore and domestic policy. We have U.S. inflation at rates we haven't seen for 40 years. Curious if you could just kind of explain to us what you see are the underpinnings of this high inflation and what policy response we should have.
Yeah, I see two major driving forces, and it's actually one of the things that I've warned about over the last few years, and that is one of it is our out-of-control spending. You know, we've put, you know, 5 trillion, 6 trillion, and quantitative easing, multiple trillions of dollars, and that just leads to inflation. And so we don't have our fiscal house in order. You know, the interesting thing is I actually helped plan the first Tea Party in the state of Utah. I was at a scout camp, and I had a neighbor that had just seen Rick Sanatelli's rant about, this was in 2009, and he said, I want to plan I'll hold a Tea Party. And so I helped him get the Capitol, and David Kirkham and the Tea Party movement was off in the state of Utah. But the sad thing is we were protesting a $700 billion TARP bill and $9 trillion in debt. And 13 years later, we're at 30 trillion, and now, you know, $5 trillion bills don't seem to be a big deal. But the other part of that is that's not talked about quite as much is our energy policy. You know, a year and a half ago we were energy independent, and when gas prices rise, everything rises because almost everything is transported, and so for me that's the other part, and that's an easy fix, and yet President Biden is not willing to do those things, and that's to drill here in the United States.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time in rural Utah, and the rural Utah is being hit particularly hard because they have to drive farther for everything, you know, and jobs are harder to find in rural Utah, but you always have this great advantage of having living in wide open spaces. But if you don't have the money to drive in your car, you don't get the advantages of being in rural Utah. And it's also the poor, too, that are being hurt because they spend a greater percentage of their income on food and heating and housing, and those things have all gone. But both of those can be fixed or relatively easy.
Yeah.
We should be drilling and becoming energy independent.
So high inflation, rising interest rates. You mentioned that it's too much government spending, too much loose money from the Federal Reserve, our energy independence. Here in Utah, our economy is very strong. You know, our job growth surpasses historical standards, unemployment below 2%. Do you give any credit to existing state leaders, Governor Cox, Speaker Wilson, President Adams?
I do give credit to I mean, I'm an old legislature, so my credit will mostly go to the legislature on that issue. But I also do have some criticism of both of them, you know, because some of the rising prices are actually government made. You know, you look at the COVID restrictions that happened, and it doesn't take a nuclear scientist to realize that if you lock people up in their homes, don't let them to go to work, don't allow building for 2 years, you restrict business. Well, you know, some government leaders, I think, thought that just because they did that, people wouldn't still get married, people would still graduate, people, if anything, are having more kids just because they have less to do. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't build, is it really surprising to people that you know, starter homes have gone from 250 to 450? The same thing happens if you restrict lumber that has come into the United States. You don't, you know, radical environmental policies don't let us use our own forests. That the prices have gone, and that adds to the inflation. And so that's the difficulty you have. Is yes, Utah's in a good place as far as job goes, but can the same. You need to be making significantly more money now to afford a house. I have a daughter that's 21. We have our first grandchild. And, you know, I fear that if they will ever be able to buy a house.
So speaking about your first grandchild, let's go to the national debt.
Uh-huh.
We're asking our children and grandchildren to pay back the things that we're spending today. You mentioned how high the debt is. You also, you know, talk about all this excess spending. What would you do to get government spending under control? Do you have some specifics, and I'll have a follow-up.
Yeah. Well, you know, and this is one of the things I do run on my record. I mean, I've been known as a fiscal conservative. Again, I helped plan the first Tea Party in the state of Utah. But to me, it's to the point of being immoral, because we are spending our children's inheritance. And the fact of the matter is, I'm greatly concerned that at some point the dollar is not going to be the world's reserve currency. And once that happens, we can't just simply borrow, and we're going to be more like Greece, and we can't do that. And so we have to kind of have an all hands on deck. We need to look at departments that need to be cut. We need to scale back on our expectations. And so everything has to be looked at. And this is one of the things too. Even though I greatly love the Ukraine, the $40 billion that we spent on Ukraine, that was $7 billion than President Biden originally asked for. And so you take $7 billion in chunks, and it starts to add up and become real money. So we have to look at everything.
I mentioned I'd have a follow-up. So raising the retirement age for Social Security, would you support that?
Absolutely. You know, I think you have to keep the commitment of those that are there or almost there. But I'm 57. If you tell me that I have to work another 2 years or 3 years, I can make that adjustment and make it earlier.
How about means testing Social Security? You only get it if you're poor, or means testing Medicare.
Yeah, that one, I mean, I struggle with a little bit more because those people have put in it and they've counted on that money. So that's supposed to match that. But I would be willing to look at everything. That one's, I can't just say yes on that right now. But as far as raising the age limit,
that's one you've looked at closely. So I have also heard you say that next time we have the time to raise the debt ceiling, which our federal government does frequently, that you would not do it unless there was a specific plan to get spending under control. Is that correct?
Yes,
I have that right?
That is correct.
What are you looking for in that plan?
Well, because
and part of why I'm asking that is anything that challenges the creditworthiness of the United States of America is a little scary, right? Yeah. So we want to be really careful about what we do with the debt ceiling. So with that in mind.
Yeah, and that's why I would do it beforehand. I would let leaders know beforehand. So if you want my vote, I think it's not proper at the last minute, but if you want my vote, and I would work, frankly, to build a coalition of others that say that is, we have to have it. Because, if we were to try to balance the budget in 1 year, we would have social unrest. But that basically could happen if other nations start to have the world's reserve currency and we just can't go out and borrow money, and that's not good either. And I mean, that would be a major problem for the United States. But I feel that if I give notice and say, hey, if you want my vote ever to raise the debt ceiling, there better be a plan in place. And that way, they can't say that I didn't tell them so.
You got it. If you are just joining us, this is a debate between Republican primary candidates for the 3rd Congressional District, put together by the Utah Debate Commission. With us today is Chris Herod. Representative Curtis could not attend today's debate due to a prior work commitment. We're going to switch topics now, and to start off this segment, we have Jessica Lowell from KSL News Radio. Jessica.
Thanks. In the wake of a number of high-profile shootings, including one tonight at a Tulsa hospital, where there have been at least 4 confirmed dead, do you see a bipartisan path forward for gun reform?
I mean, I think there's things that we can do to protect, and as far as what's happened in Texas and those places, I do think that our first, we should just simply give love to those people. It is tragic for anybody to lose a child. And so that's where my hearts and prayers go out to those parents, especially the family that have lost both their mom and dad, their dad to a heart attack. As a community, we should do everything we can to love those people. But as far as my position on the Second Amendment has not changed. And for me, my belief in the Second Amendment comes back to much of my time living overseas. And if you look at how different the Ukrainian war would be right now if they had the type of gun laws that we have here. There is a shortage of just regular guns in the Ukraine. And worse than that, most people aren't familiar with Olene Walker. Olene Walker happened in the fall of 1932. Right after harvest, Stalin came in and took all of the harvest from Ukrainian farmers. And that year, 7 to 11 million Ukrainians died. And so I have to look at that part, and I believe that there's a purpose for the Second Amendment. But are there things that we can do to protect schools? Absolutely. I think one of the things that I would propose, if any school has leftover COVID money, is to be able to use those to make sure that they have procedures that would have prevented what happened in Texas. And I think as the more we're learning, we see that there has been procedures that were violated. But we also forget to talk about the number of incidences where guns have actually saved life. And so for me, my Second Amendment belief has not changed. We need to look at what's happening in society. AR-15s were available for 40 years before they were involved in the first type of shooting like this. And so something has changed in our society. The fact of the matter is, most gun owners use it responsibly. And And so you can't take away a responsible owner for bad, because what happens is then they shift to cars or trucks or other things. The worst school shooting or the worst school accident was somebody that broke a pipe, lent gas, and blew up the school. And so, let's look at what we can do to protect schools from that type of incursion and see what's wrong with our society.
Jessica, it looks like you have a follow-up.
Do you think that Utahns and your potential future constituents have an appetite for more gun laws?
My experience, having served in the Utah legislature, is no. I think in this state, I think we have a very deep belief in the Second Amendment.
Thank you, Jessica. So I want to continue on this for a little bit. Mr. Herod, I want to just think about these 19 children and the 2 teachers and think about how our politics, need to meet the moment, at least many of your constituents, I believe that. So a really just direct and simple question. How do we allow an 18-year-old to go in and buy an AR-15 and accumulate 1,600 rounds of ammunition and do it all legally?
Well, the problem, that's one of the things in a free society. The fact of the matter is, we're going to have society values freedom. We're going to lose 100,000 people in this country this year because of drug overdoses, and yet many people are not willing to seal the border. We have, I personally don't drink, but others drink. Most people drink responsibly. And yet we allow alcohol to be sold. And so in a free society, I respect other people's rights, and they respect ours. And for me, it is extremely frustrating when you have somebody like, I forgot Beto O'Rourke, that simply used this as a political event, as if I love my kids. Nobody loves my kids more than I do. But I have to look at society as a whole and what we value. The fact of the matter is this is one of my concerns that we've had over the last 2 years, where our kids have been taught to constantly be in a state of fear. They were put in these situations with masks and things like that when they had very little risk of COVID-19. And are we surprised that we stick kids in basements for 2 years, those type of things, and then we have outbursts? But the fact of the matter is school is still one of the safest places for a child to be. Mm-hmm. And so there's other things that they could be out doing other activities and have a 30 more chance of drowning and things like that. And so sometimes we have to pull it back to a big perspective on that. Again, my heart goes out to that, to them. And let's see what we need to do to make sure that we have single access points at schools and other things that we can protect those school buildings.
I'm going to press just a little bit more because this is such a important issue right now. Many would say that we have a supply problem. The U.S. represents 4% of the world's population, has nearly 50% of the world's private guns. Mm-hmm. If you look at gun violence in this country, it's way off the charts. So my question is this. You have a perspective, someone else in Congress has a different life experiences, different perspective. How do you bring those two perspectives together and find common ground that can take us down a path that starts to do right by these young people who were murdered? Mm-hmm.
Well, again, I think it's important to teach world history.
I'm trying to think of solutions.
Solutions, yeah. And I think there are a number of solutions that we can agree on. I think one is having a single entry point. When you look at what happened in Texas, that school was supposed to be in lockdown. There was a shot outside of that 10 minutes before that school. That school did not go into lockdown. Yeah. So there's procedures that were not followed. And again, that's why I think it's a little bit early to decisions made in crisis mode are usually not good. Now, the left tends to like crisis because they push for it. I think it was President Obama's advisor that said, never let a crisis go to waste. But I think we need to come back and have a rational conversation about it. In my life, guns are less available than when I was growing up. I mean, kids used to go to school with a gun in their car, hung up. And so something else has happened in society. And so for me, you can call that, my belief in the Second Amendment as you don't understand it. But when I see, I have friends that lost both their parents to Stalin's gulags. I have a good friend that had to shout Red Terror as teenagers were shot down in front of him in Ethiopia. And so when you see, but what's the first thing that always happens with governments that take over is to take away guns. And so you have to add to that list, to that equation, the 100 million people that communism killed last century. And so, it is, if somebody wants to change it, then go through the constitutional amendment process, change it. But to me, that's my understanding of the Constitution. And on this issue, I cannot change.
Many would say that the common ground is not gun control, but gun safety. So building from gun safety and solutions. I heard you say single point of entry. Where are you? I'll just go through a list of these on universal background checks.
I think our current laws are good as they are.
What about making it so you have to be 21 years old to purchase a semi-automatic?
I'm also a big believer in states' rights, and so the states can decide that, and so I'll defer
So that one you'd be flexible with.
That goes to the Utah legislature.
3-day waiting period.
It's already, those things are for the most part happen, but I am. You can go through them. I think I'm going to be
National Gun Sale Database.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
Not that. Mental health funding.
On that issue, I do think that we can find some common ground. And, on what causes a 18-year-old boy to shoot his grandma that has raised him. And, where were things missed in that process around him? So that is actually an area that we could agree on.
Last question on the mass shootings and guns. I think it's important for the viewing, listening audience to understand how you approach common ground with people you disagree with. How would you describe that? Because many constituents see Washington, D.C. in complete paralysis. And yet we have problems we need to solve. Mm-hmm. So you're elected. How do you find a way to create common ground? How do you approach that?
I do. I like to say that I have 3 categories of votes. So I have my core principles, which are over here, and on those things I do not budge. So those are constitutional principles. My understanding of the Constitution, if you wanted me to become to vote for an abortion law, I'm not going to change those, and I try to make those known ahead of time to my constituents. So if you want somebody to vote for abortion, don't send me. If you want somebody to change, to weaken Second Amendment laws, then you probably shouldn't change me. If you want me to break the Constitution, don't send me. But then I have my middle categories of you have, if we're honest, sometimes you have constitutional principles that rub up against each other. You have my belief in limited government or my business experience, my understanding of natural law or whatever. Those issues you can go back and forth on. And then I have my categories of, there's no constitutional principle, there's no economic principle. Whatever my constituents want, I will push for. And so that's kind of how I approach it. And I do think you can find ground on, when I was in the Utah legislature, it's no secret that I have a conservative record, but I was able to work across the aisle on certain issues with people that probably didn't think that I could on those issues. And so when you find that, you can work on it. But we have to be honest. The real one of the problems that we have in D.C. right now, though, is that there is very few blue dog Democrats or Reagan Republicans, and that does make it different. Can I work on with AOC on the environment? I highly doubt it, because she has a much different worldview, and the Democratic Party is, for the most part, been taken over by progressives. I can work with a Blue Dog or a Reagan Democrat, but I have a very hard time with somebody that has a fundamentally belief of the Constitution, of American history, those type of things. That is much harder.
Mr. Herod, Republican Party is in a bit of turmoil. You've said publicly that if you're a Spencer Cox or Mitt Romney Republican, I'm not your guy.
Yeah,
Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want you to elaborate on that. Let's tell the viewers and listeners what you mean.
Well, because there is a difference, and this is one of the reasons that I'm running, because, you know, you look at Mitt Romney and Spencer Cox and John Curtis, they've all endorsed each other. Now, I come much more from the Greg Hughes or Ron DeSantis or Ted Cruz. You know, I ran the Ted Cruz campaign in 2016, presidential campaign. Mike Lee or Donald Trump. If you're one of those, then I'm much more part of that. And to me, it is a little bit frustrating, and I appreciate actually this question, is that oftentimes we talk about unity, but what happens, I think, with some of the establishment Republicans is, and I would put Mitt Romney and Spencer Cox in that, is unity is if, well, you come to them. And, you know, I've been in politics for the last 20 years in Utah, and unfortunately, I've been called racist, unchristian, uncompassionate, foaming at the mouth zealot, and that's just by the Deseret News, the Deseret Media Group. And so it seems that there's open season on conservatives, but then we're expected to we don't, you know, when we push back, then we get beat up. But and for me, I really do. I actually fear for our country right now, because I see a left-right divide, but I also see an elite, non-elite divide in this country. And I think it was, you saw it with President Trump. Many did not support President Trump. And I use this example, and this is one of the reasons I really thought President Trump was going to win in 2020. I was driving home, and I was at the mouth of Provo Canyon, and there was a park where the old Cascade golf course used to be, and there was a Trump rally. And, you know, I've been in politics quite a while, so I thought I'd stop by and see some of my friends that I hadn't seen for a little while, and I pulled in, and I knew no one. Now, the truth be known, I was probably the only one without a tattoo. But this is exactly what we keep saying that the Republican Party needed. We needed a broader base. These were good people that felt like they had been left out and had voted for President Trump. And yet the establishment of the state really was very critical of President Trump. And like I said, for me, it's personal, because I truly don't believe that you know, my mother-in-law, after 3 months, we've finally been able to get her to leave Ukraine, and she'll be here tomorrow. But I don't think that would have happened had President Trump still been in office. And so, you know, this civility needs to go both ways. And you saw it in COVID. You know, those of us that were concerned about our children, you know, I had a child in elementary school, junior high, high school, and 2 in college, and each of my children were hurt by mask mandates and COVID restrictions. But if we ever spoke up, we were told that we didn't care about people. It's kind of the same thing that happens with the gun thing. If you're a Second Amendment person, you don't care about kids, or if you're not for big spending, you don't care about kids. And so for me, that's. I wish we would take the open season off of conservatives in the state. I wish we really could get together. But, you know, when Mitt Romney won the presidential election, my family, we were talking to my parents, we were all in. We were, no, not the presidential election, but the Republican nomination. Yeah. We were all in for Mitt Romney. My 13-year-old son, we were walking for Mitt in Las Vegas, and he had a gun pulled on him when we were walking in this neighborhood. It was a memorable experience. He was safe, fortunately, but we were all in when a liberal member of the Republican Party won. But we don't seem to get that when a conservative member of the Republican Party.
I'm sure you've been asked this before, but did President Biden win the last election?
You know, for me, this has kind of become a litmus test, which I don't understand. Do I have doubts that there was fraud? I absolutely have doubts, and I can tell you that example of the Trump rally that I went to. I follow a professor back east that says that 16 of the 18 indicators said that President Trump. But could we prove that there was fraud? No. And so President Biden is the president of the United States right now. But I think that we can still do more to make sure that our elections are secure. And you know, I do find this kind of interesting is that, you know, many people had no problem with the Mueller investigation, trying to see if the 2016, but those same people, if you say you have doubts, but I think we need to have an honest conversation, too, is that it doesn't take massive fraud to sway an election. You know, you can do it in 6 counties. And if you watch 2,000 Mules, I mean, I hope that we follow up on those. And I have stated all along, I think there's wisdom in the Founding Fathers. They said that elections are supposed to be on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And we have strayed from that. And, you know, France just had an election of paper ballots. And so I'm a same-day, in-person, voter ID'd paper ballot guy. And so I think that's the best way to have a secure election. And it benefits both parties to make sure, because if people feel like their vote was stolen, violence happens really quickly.
Again, we would like to say that this debate put together by the Utah Debate Commission features candidates running in the Republican primary for the 3rd Congressional District. John Curtis could not attend due to international travel, so Chris Herod is the sole person on stage. I wish Mr. Curtis were here to respond to questions and speak for himself, but I have a list of questions I'd like Mr. Herod to compare with and contrast as we get later in the debate or in this conversation. I'll invite our audience to refer to Mr. Curtis's website or contact his campaign for his response to these same issues. Let's start out this segment with a question from Kelsey Hartley, a reporter from the Daily Herald. Kelsey.
Thank you, Natalie. Hello, Mr. Herod.
Hello.
My first question for you would have to do with Representative Curtis's founding of the Conservative Climate Caucus, which now includes the entire Utah House delegation. If elected, would you continue to focus on energy, climate, and public lands?
Well, I mean, I have a long history with public lands. I like to say that I kind of restarted the debate over public lands in 2010 when I was in the Utah legislature. I would continue that part. I would continue the part of energy. But I do differ with Mr. Curtis on his energy caucus because there are certain issues that we need to defeat. And I believe the radical global warming caucus that is out there, the agenda that is out there, is harmful to our country. You know, it is that we're not drilling right now. We should become a net exporter. And when Representative Curtis goes and uses taxpayer money to travel to, you know, to Scotland or to Glasgow, that's giving credibility to that organization. And they want to weaken the United States. I truly believe this. You can see that what's happening right now. We are sacrificing Ukrainian lives because of a concern over global warming. The best thing to do to put Putin in his place and to put our enemies in place is to drive down oil. Venezuela loves $120 a barrel. Iran does. Putin does. I mean, the fact of the matter is the ruble is higher now than it was before the invasion because he's selling it to India and China. It's a global market. And the only way to stop that is to push that down. Now, I believe that Utahns, you know, I consider myself an environmentalist. I'd love to go to the high Uintas, but I'm a multi-use guy, and I also do a cost-benefit analysis. Frankly, I fear Xi and Putin much more than I do catastrophic global warming. And so we need to defeat that belief because our kids are being taught right now in school that their parents don't care about the environment, that we need to do an all-hands on right now, even if it sacrifices our nation's national security. I simply don't believe that. When green energy is ready, then we can adopt it, but it's not ready. And if we follow down this path, it's going to destroy rural Utah. I was there in 2009 when President Obama's Undersecretary of Interior came right after they pulled the 77 leases. And I saw the pain in that community. There was 1,000 people that were worried about their livelihood. I met people that had to sell their businesses, lost everything. And so there's no reason that we can, there's a much different, if you're talking about lead, zinc, all those type of things in the air, and CO2 in the air, there is a much different. I taught a class 6 years ago in the university, a small liberal arts university, where we studied the literature. And it's false to say that the majority of scientists believe in catastrophic global warming. Yes, man affects it, but not at the risk of national security. And many of the things that we do in this movement actually make things worse. It's like killing the Keystone Pipeline. Much of that oil will still go to the Gulf, but it'll be trucked now, which is not as good for the environment, is more harmful. More people will die because of accidents on the road. But that excess capacity now will go to China, and China does not care about the environment. I can tell you, communist nations, when I first went to the Ukraine in 1992, my hands broke out, and I went to the doctor. And this was in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and he kind of laughed, and he said, well, if you, the entire periodic table is in the air, and if you have an allergy and you come to Kharkiv, you're going to break out. And that's kind of how it was with that. And so if we really want to care about the environment, let's keep the jobs here, where we're much more efficient at CO2 per kilowatt hour than China is. We're much better at manufacturing and things like that, but we cannot risk our national security because we have some real deep threats. So,
Give Kelsey one more question.
Yes, thank you so much for that answer. And on a different topic, you've previously stated you'd like to possibly eliminate the Department of Education and replace it with grants. Could you kind of elaborate on how that grant funding would work under your plan?
Yeah, that's one of those kind of things. We have to look at everything. The Department of Education was not created until 1972, so we survived almost 200 years without it. Unfortunately, it was a Republican president that created that. And so the way that I would say it is work is just cut the Department of Education. You'd save all that bureaucracy money. But the problem that you would have, and this is how I look at things strategically, because I was a legislature and I was able to get things down. The problem that you have is many states right now are, you could say, addicted or hooked on the money. They depend on that money coming from the states. So if you simply said, I'm going to get rid of it and get rid of all the money, you're never going to get enough votes to pass it. But what I would tell people is, propose a bill is to cut the bureaucracy and then block grant that money with states knowing that that money was going to decrease over 10 years. And so I think that's a way that you can get enough votes, because it really comes back to my understanding of the Constitution. And I am a 10th Amendment individual. I don't think that that's the purpose of the federal government, that states know how to do it. Again, they did it for 200 years without that. And you have laboratories of democracy. Whereas each state, everybody's different. Utah's much different. We have higher kids, and so we have to change a few things. But I don't think that we should. It makes no sense for me to send money to Washington and then we get it back. And we got at least the numbers. If I remember correctly, when I was in the legislature, we got 6% of the money from the federal government, but we got 100% of the rules. And so for me, you break those strings so that the state has the freedom to do what it best wants to do. But, and some people have said, in fact, I think it was your article, somebody said there was an audible gas. To me, that's not that controversial, because we're going to have to do that to a lot of departments if we're really serious about if we say that we really love our kids, if we really don't want to steal from our grandchildren, then we have to start cutting lots of places. And so for me, that's an easy one. And let's go back to the core of what the Constitution says the federal government is supposed to do.
Mr. Herod, so Mr. Curtis isn't here. I'll refer the listening, viewing audience to his website, to his campaign, but I want to know how you're different then Mr. Curtis on critical race theory. We're going to do these pretty quickly. Okay. Critical race theory, how are you different?
I've been a very outspoken critic from the very beginning. Representative Curtis has been very quiet on the issue. And so I've spoke out against critical race theory and even criticized the Black Lives Matter, the Marxist roots of that organization, because that will destroy America. And my experience is that no nation in the world has brought so many different races, ethnicities together in relative peace as the United States. And I have immigrants into this country, or into my home all the time. They love this country. But that will destroy us if we allow that to continue.
How are you different on Roe v. Wade?
I think, at least from what John or Representative Curtis has said, or Mr. Curtis has said, I've been an outspoken critic of it from the very beginning. I think his policy, he said he was happy. I'm elated. And then again, this is one of those things that I don't think people give President Trump credit. If we wouldn't have had President Trump in 2016, we wouldn't have had what we hope is coming down the line.
To Utahns, we often talk about rape, the exceptions being rape, incest, life and health of the mother. Are those the exceptions you would have?
Those are the predominant ones. I think that's what comes into effect with Utah's bill.
Trigger law. ESG scores. So this is environmental, social governance scores that affect corporate decisions, bond ratings.
When I was in business school from 90 to 92, we started to get stakeholder things and like that. And many of us expressed concern clear back then is because that becomes pretty fuzzy of what. I'm completely against ESG scores. It needs to be, I'm not a big person to regulate, but we already regulate banks. Banks should make decisions on financial issues. But I've known about this for years, and there's two forces out there that are trying to take down America, I believe. I believe that you have where the ESG scores are coming from, the World Economic Forum, which is trying to bring socialism through. They say democratic means. I don't think they're real democratic. I think it's more a form of socialism. But you do have the traditional communist or authoritarian regimes, Russia and China. If you're afraid of ESG scores, understand China's social credit score, and you'll really be frightened. We can't allow either of those systems to come to the United States.
How about regulation of big tech? Apple, Amazon, Facebook?
Absolutely. Whenever I used to teach my students when I was in the Ukraine in 92 and 95, 96, that as long as they had government corruption, government and business corruption, monopolies, and mafias, they would never get the benefit of a free market system, because it's not the best system, business that rises to the top. It's the one that knows how to play the game. And many of these tech companies are now, they have monopolistic control effectively over many of the things. And you look at even the Hunter Biden stories, there have been reports that if the Hunter Biden story had not been censored on Facebook, on other platforms, that it could have changed the last election. And so when they have that much control, they can't have both 42 and not. I mean, if they're going to get exemptions, then they should. It should be a market of free speech.
Last one on this kind of, moving through quickly, on a changing climate, do you believe the surface temperature of the Earth is rising?
I mean, I think there's been a long-term trend since the last ice age.
And are humans contributing to that rise?
Yeah, when we put asphalt in places like that, it does make a difference. But I don't believe in catastrophic global. And like I said, I know plenty of good scientists that don't either. It's not that you're trying to, they say that you're a climate denier and things like that. To me, you just have to put it in the whole perspective. We can't risk national security. We can't, risk people dying. We can't, because when the economy doesn't do well, then you have higher rates of depression and things like that. But yes, but we also have to understand that the ocean, 14,000 years ago, the ocean was 375 feet lower than it is today. During the Jurassic period, there was 6 times the CO2 in the air, and that's why things could grow. So you have to understand all the science and not be really careful. Not you're being driven by a political ideology.
Mr. Herod, if you're successful in this campaign, what will your priorities be in the first 100 days and your first 2 years in office?
You know, the number one thing that I look at as any representative is my number one thing that I want to do is to protect individual rights. The constituents of the state of Utah, I believe that God has given citizens certain inalienable rights. And so I will protect that, and whenever I see an infringement on that, I will step in and fight for that. The other thing that I would do is what I've told people I want to do is I want to have a list. It'll be very difficult for the next 2 years, but I want to have a list of executive orders that I want the president, the new Republican president in 2 years, that he does on his first day. And then what I want to do is I want to pass laws that forbids the next president from doing those executive orders. A core part of my platform is clawing back power from the executive branch. And primarily it's been done through rulemaking authority. So I want to pull that back, getting back to what I think is the original interpretation of the Constitution, and then I push as much of those powers back to the states. And so that's going to be one of my focuses. The other thing is to make sure that we have a conservative caucus. I was able to build one in the Utah legislature, and kind of the unspoken rule when I entered the Utah legislature is don't cause too many problems. After 6 years, we'll give you a chairmanship. Well, I was fortunate enough to come in with 4 other like-minded individuals. We immediately got to work, and people soon learned that if you dealt with one of us, you dealt with 5 of us, and we swayed every single leadership election. There's going to be a record amount of freshman legislators this year, and I want to get back and influence leadership elections and make sure that Republicans actually do what they're saying they're going to do. And this, I think, is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do that.
Mr. Herod, we have about a minute and a half until your closing statement. You've run for this position 3 times. I want to just ask you very quickly, what's different this time? What lesson have you learned? You know,
the first time I ran, there was 3 of us, and Tanner Ainge ran as a conservative, so we split the conservative. The second time I ran, I shouldn't have run because John had only been in a few months, and people thought he should have that. But now John has a record, and whether it's his vote for the ERA amendment, the January 6th Commission, many other votes that I disagree with, we can contrast. And also, I think most people now are looking for somebody that's willing to stand up, to be a fighter, and I'm known as a fighter. Before I entered the Utah legislature, I was ranked #1 in the nation in fencing for over 40-year-olds. And so I have, don't let my smile confuse you that I can't be competitive or I'm not willing to fight. And so I think things are much more different this time around.
Thank you. We are nearing the end of the debate. We'd like to offer Chris Herod a final 1-minute closing statement. Mr. Herod.
As mentioned before, if you're Mitt Romney, if you think that Mitt Romney has done a good job for the state of Utah, then I'm probably not your guy. Or if you're supportive of Governor Cox, then I'm probably not your person. And John Curtis has been endorsed by those that have endorsed each other. But if you're want somebody that's willing to stand up and to shake up Washington, I'm your guy. I'm much more aligned with Greg Hughes, Ron DeSantis, President Trump, Mike Lee. And when I say that I fear for this nation, I do. I think we've been asleep for the last 30 years. We've been lulled into conversation, or lulled to sleep thinking that the world is not a dangerous place. China is building ports around the world. And if we don't stand up now, we're going to lose our freedoms. And I want to make this promise to you. If you give me the honor to go to Washington, D.C., I will defend your rights. I will wear myself out in defending those rights and making sure that we pass good legislation that makes sure that our kids and grandkids have the same freedoms that we have. I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Herod. I want to thank you for participating in our debate today and mention one more time that John Curtis could not join us due to a prior commitment. It means a lot that you were here today, and I thought it was a very illuminating, instructive conversation, so thank you. I want to thank the media partners who carried this debate live on their broadcast channels and on their social media platforms. We'd also like to thank doTERRA International for sponsoring all of our primary debates. As a reminder, Utah's primary election is June 28th. If you are a registered voter, you should start receiving your ballots next week. Unaffiliated voters, or people who would like to register to vote, can affiliate with the Republican Party up until Election Day. You can check on your status or learn more about the election at vote.utah.gov. Please visit the Utah Debate Commission website to view this and all our debates at any time. On behalf of the Utah Debate Commission, I'm Natalie Gochnour. Thanks for joining us.
questions?
A couple of questions,
Okay.
and it's just going to be pretty straightforward. And this is just in lieu of the fact that, I've got a couple of questions that didn't ask in the debate.
Okay.
And then I've got just general reflections on it. So,
Okay.
so let me know when we're ready.
Come this way a little bit more. Keep just closer to this camera so he's not looking off. And then we're not.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh, you're not. I get it. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Right there.
Okay, Mr. Harrod, how do you think this process went?
Yeah, actually, this was very enjoyable. It was very relaxing for me, and I think we had a good exchange of ideas. And so I want to thank Natalie. I'd do this again, and it even wasn't that stressful, so thank you.
There were a couple questions that we didn't get to at the debate. One of them is combating drought. What can be done on a federal level to combat drought?
Well, the most important thing I think that a congressman can do is make sure that we protect our allocation of the Colorado Water Compact. And so for me, that will be my primary focus is to make sure that we get that water that we're deserved. As far as the rest, I think that's again best left to state legislators as far as what they're going to do to that. But if you send me to Washington, I will make sure that I protect our Colorado water. We love Lake Powell, and I want to make sure that we continue to go to Lake Powell. So.
Another Republican litmus test question. How do you reflect on the events of January 6th?
I've been very open. I condemn the violence. I think that we need to make sure that we learn from Martin Luther King and his movement about nonviolence. And so I was greatly disappointed in the violence that happened that day. I've planned a dozen rallies my life, many of them in the Utah State Capitol, and we never had violence. Having said that, I think that we have to make sure that we put it in perspective, though. I don't think that it was an insurrection. It's not like somebody was going to take over powers, issue commands to the Pentagon or anything like that. And they were able to, finish their meetings in the evening, and it wasn't firebombed. You contrast that what happened the summer before with Black Lives Matter and many of those protests. And so I am concerned that some people that have been held without, I think, due process, and there are videos that show that some people were allowed. Now, I criticize them because as Republicans and somebody that's been a conservative member, I think that I have to live a higher standard, because if I do anything dumb, they'll really blow it up in the liberal media. And so people got caught up in that and shouldn't have done that. But there should never be violence.
Do the wealthy or do corporations pay no taxes?
I'm a big believer. I mean, when the top 10% are paying more than 50%, then I understand that that they produce a lot of jobs. I'm not in that category, and I do think that there's something to be said that everybody has skin in the game. But what happens, and you can see the downward spiral in socialist countries where, it's like Margaret Thatcher said that the problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money to spend, and so there has to be that balance. Now, I think there are some loopholes that can be filled. I think that it is unfair when somebody has a lower tax rate that's making millions of dollars than somebody else. Those things need to be looked at. But I think when we can't get into the system where we punish wealth or punish success, and so. And like I said, I think we all benefit from national security, and so we should all have some skin in the game. But we need to make sure that it's that we don't favor one group of people over another. And so again, I'm a free market guy that believes in not having government pick and choose winners, and so that goes to kind of all aspects of government.
Is there anything that you didn't get to mention in the debate that you wanted to?
Well, you know, one of the things I did forget to mention is I have been surrounded by great volunteers, and never in my life have I had seen so many people that are concerned about this country, that have been willing to get in and to give it all. And you know, as somebody that has spent much of my life in public service, you know, it's grateful when I see others support me. It's kind of humbling. Conservatives, we don't take help very easy. We like to be self-sufficient. But I have been overwhelmed by the support that I've had this life. And the one person that I do always forget that is my grounding is my wife. You know, I at least get to have some of the fun of politics, and she has to run the household while I'm off, and she has been very patient with me. And so it would be a terrible disrespect if I didn't thank my wife. You know, one of those things, you know, I was once accused by a prominent media individual of putting words into my wife's mouth, that I kind of used her as a prop. Now, if you know my wife, my parents are probably just laughing because she is as opinionated as I am. I couldn't do anything. But she has a great love of this country. And she's frightened for where we're headed. The interesting thing is going through the delegate process, came across just by happenstance, one of the delegates in the 3rd District grew up and lived in my wife's home city. And they're probably 20 years older than us, and they had us over for dinner on Sunday. And so we were, it just reminded my time of back in Ukraine. But they said something that kind of was sad and frightening to me. And they said that all their life they grew up with the United States being this beacon of freedom in their life. That was their great hope. And they came to the United States, and now they're fearful of what they see happening in the United States right now. And they know that there's no place else to go. And one of the many things that I love about immigrants is their love for this country and why they came here. And we are in danger of losing it. And so one of the things that I would encourage everybody to do is to make sure that they get involved. We've reached the point of, we've gone from silly to wackiness to actually harmful in many of our social policies. You know, I have a daughter that was fortunate to play college soccer, but it is simply not safe to have a man play in the same sport. She was able to make it that far because she gave everything. She didn't care about her body, two ACLs. But it's one thing if she hits another 100-pound girl. It's another if she hits a 200-pound guy. But then we're not willing to be energy independent. And some of the policies that are going right now, it's almost like people want to take this country down. And to me, that frightens me. And we're seeing the things that happens when, you know, we're almost moving to a planned economy where the government picked and chose winners with what is essential and non-essential. And we're really surprised when we have shortages. And the more you go down that socialist road, the more shortages you're going to get. You know, I'm grateful fear of what's going to happen this fall with food and other places. And so it's just my plea for Americans to avoid socialism like the plague and to get involved and make sure, because I can't do this. If you think you can send one person to Washington, D.C., and solve all your problems, that's not going to happen. We've got many problems. It's going to take all of us. We'd love some help. If you want to help our campaign, make sure that you get involved and contact our campaign.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.